Hello, one and all, and welcome to a magical episode of Top Deck Thoughts. Now, this is going to be a special edition where we're actually going to talk about the top 10 cards, in my opinion, that are coming from Strixhaven School of Mages. Now, a few warnings I want to say right off the bat. Even though I do think these are the top cards of the set, I would still be very cautious of crafting the cards, especially for the first few weeks. While I do think these are safe crafts in general, I do think you want to be very cautious. Still, just play with what you pull, whether from the free packs or whether if you pre-ordered or buy stuff with essentially gold or gems. Just play with what you pull and then wait for a few weeks to go by till the meta kind of like stabilizes, and then craft cards that you think would be with decks and archetypes that you would want to play, whether or not you're grinding through the ladder or just playing casual play with your friends or family and such. Now we got that warning out of the way, let's actually start with two honorable mentions. Some of them might be a bit controversial, but I'll explain why I have them as honorary mentions. First off, Blade Historian. Now, the reason why this card has been seeing a lot of talk around the community is because it's a very powerful addition to the Winota deck designs. For those who do not know what I mean, Winota is a very popular card in the format, where essentially what you can do is you can actually tutor this out with the Winota's attack trigger, essentially, and then theoretically get all of your creatures double strike that are attacking at the moment, which then should, in theory, be a finisher. The reason why this is an honorary mention, though, is while I do think it's going to be a powerful addition to Winota, I'm not 100% sure that Winota is going to be upgraded a tier due to this card, if that makes sense. I think this is going to be a card that's going to be a powerful addition, but I don't think the Winota decks are going to do well, especially since we still have very popular removal within the format. So, with the popular removal we have in the format, I'm not 100% sure, but I could be wrong. And then another addition to the honorary mention that's going to be a little bit controversial, maybe some flack by this, but Vanishing Verse. Now, a few clarifications. One, I do think Vanishing Verse is, like, for me, the 11th card on the list that just made it to the 11th and not to the top 10. Yes, Vanishing Verse is a very, very powerful card currently in the format. Like, it targets a lot of popular cards, especially through Eldraine, as well a little bit through Pharaohs and such. It targets, like, the most powerful threats in the format at the moment, like Embercleave, the Great Hinge, Bonecrusher Giant, Anats, Lovestruck Beast. Like, I could go on. But the reason why I have it so high on the list is because I think it's a card that is going to be so good that I think it's going to get worse. What do I mean by that? Well, what I think is a lot of people are going to pretty much week one and such, while people are still playing with their less optimized decks due to Strixhaven and such, like they play their old base packages, especially the monocolored aggro decks or mid-range decks. They're going to see people playing a full playset of this, and then they essentially are going to be very, very salty, / also maybe just be like, oh, I'm going to have to adapt my game plan. And the thing is, as much as Vanishing Verse is a very powerful card, we are also getting a variety of powerful gold cards coming from the set that is going to make this removal a little bit worse. Some that are even on this list. So, you gotta keep that in mind. Plus, we still have popular colorless threats in the format, stuff like Faceless Haven, Crawling Barrens, Solemn Miraculum, Stonecoil Serpent, Ugin, and this card does not answer those cards at all. Now, you could make the argument that you can just answer them with other popular removal within this color pair. That's true, and then just save this for the late game threats. But I feel like this is not going to be the automatically for inclusive that I think a lot of people have been hyping this card up to be. I think this is going to be a card that will see play, but I think it's more of a, you want to play this as a 2 of, maybe even just a 1 of, if I'm being honest, because I feel like we already have the 2-drop removal slot is very competitive in the format, and while Vanishing Verse is very powerful, I do think it's going to be one of those cards where it's going to be powerful for the first few weeks while the meta is stabilizing, and then once people get used to playing around it, like putting more multicolor threats or colorless threats within their deck design, then the card will get a little bit worse. Not bad. It's still going to be a really good card, but I do think the card is just going to be a little bit worse for wear later down the line when it's get played in the meta. Still, it's a very powerful card. Will it see play? Absolutely. But it's the 11th spot. It's the honorary mention. That's the reason why. Nevertheless, let's actually get started on the list. So the number 10th card on the spot, Elite Spellbinder. This card, very powerful. Just a free mana, free 1 flyer. That's just good stats in itself. But also the ETB effect is the main star of the show here. Just being able to choose a card from your opponent's hand and having to make them wait till they can spend a 2 additional mana on it to essentially be able to play the spell. Just providing that tax effect is very powerful in the right deck designs. Like, let's say you put this in aggro, being able to essentially make them have to spend additional mana onto a board wipe, so it delays the board wipe. That's very powerful. This is also very powerful in control-based shells, like being able to, like, pretty much take their late-game threat or their late-game bomb and having to delay it by 2 turns so you can draw into the answer you need to answer against the card. That's very powerful. So I think this card's going to see a lot of play both in the aggro-based shells as well as any mid-range to control-based shells. Plus, also, this is an ETB effect, so it can be flickered. You gotta keep that in mind. So I think the fact that this can be flickered is the most powerful effect. Also duplicated, also reanimated, so you can pretty much copy the ETB effects a lot of times, which if you can do that, can provide some very annoying hand disruption shenanigans to your opponent. Plus, also makes you look at your opponent's hand, which can help you accommodate if you're in a control-based strategy. So, Elite Spellbinder, just a really, really good card. Next up on number 9, the Test of Talents. Now, this spell, I think, is just a very powerful spell in the current meta, because this is a card that just is going to be so good, just being able to counter some really annoying instant sorcery spells in the format, and then just essentially taking out all those instant sorcery spells from your opponent's deck. Like, let's say if you're going against rogues, they try to drown unlock one of your spells. Boom, Test of Talents. Remove all the drown of the locks from their deck. That's going to feel amazing, especially against control matchups. Like, being able to remove some of their most powerful, like, removal spells, as well as their... Sorry about that. As well as their essentially pretty much counter magic, as well as their removal. That's going to be very powerful. I think a lot of people are going to try to tutor their decks where they're not going to try to play playsets of removal spells and such, just because Test of Talents exists, especially if they're going against a blue deck. So, Test of Talents, very powerful card. It's going to definitely affect how a lot of control-based decks are going to alter their deck design, because it's going to be feeling bad if you play a playset of a certain card, and Test of Talents pretty much is going to counter your first instant of it and be like, whoop, take everything out. So yeah, that's why it's number 9 on the list. Next up, for number 8 spot, Callous Blood Mage. I just love the versatility of this card. Just free mana for a 2-1 that can produce an extra token. Nice. That helps out with board presence, especially if you're going against aggro-based matchups. That's great. Being able to allow you to draw a card and lose a life so it replaces itself, that's perfectly fine. Like, Phyrexian Rager has been a good card in the format in the past, and this is just could be a relatively good card, especially if you have Flicker or Reanimator-based strategies with this. And in one of the best parts of it, just being able to have a card that essentially gives you board presence and then says, oh, exile target player's graveyard. That is so good in this format. Like, there's a lot of graveyard shenanigans, there's stuff with Lurrus, there's stuff with, like, cycling. Just being able to essentially play this on turn 3 to remove a lot, maybe even play this on turn 4 or turn 5 if you want to be safe, and then remove all the cycling cards from an opponent's graveyard so to make their Zenith Flares less effective. That is just... And then just negating a lot of popular reanimated strategies, just very, very good versatile option. And the factor is, if you don't need the graveyard hate, and you get these other 2 options, amazing. So, Callous Blood Mage, number 8 on the list, just because the versatility it provides in the deck designs that need this versatility is awesome. Next up on the list, on number 7 spot, this is for the combo players of the world, both in Standard and Historic, Grinning Ignis, a reprint that I am still surprised is coming to Arena. This card is just... Many people had already talked to death about this card, but to summarize why this card is absurd, it's because we have a card in the format called Burgee, and what it does is anytime you cast a spell, you generate a red mana. So with Grinning Ignis, what you can do is essentially you have Burgee on the battlefield, you cast Grinning Ignis, you generate the red mana, which you use that red mana to return Grinning Ignis to your hand, have that mana generated, and then essentially be able to replay the Grinning Ignis, generate the red mana, and have infinite ETB triggers. And that's not mentioning the fact that if you have any way to reduce the cost of your creature spells, then you can, in theory, generate infinite colorless mana, which then if you have like a chromatic orrery on the battlefield, can be mana to cast on any type of spells. Like, that's a lot of absurd shenanigans you could do with this card. Plus, also, one of the cheeky things they can do with this card that I think a lot of people are going to miss is this could just be a semi-combat trick removal, in a sense. Like, let's say, for example, you play Green Ignis first for some random reason, and you have one red mana floating. Your opponent is going to be like, oh, that's a combo piece, they probably play that for tempo, I gotta remove that now. They waste their removal spell, you play the one red mana, you bounce it to your hand, you generate that colorless mana, and you spend it on any free mana or less instant spell in red. Like, let's say, for example, a Stomp, or maybe even like that one that we're getting from this set, the one that is uncounterable, deals free damage to any creature or planeswalker. I'm having a brain fart on the name, but someone will tell me in the comments. Like, stuff like that. Like, you can do some really nifty little tricks, like, in that sense of just kind of luring opponents to try to remove this, when really you can just bounce it to your hand and just cast an instant spell of your choosing. Plus, also with the combo, as mentioned before, this is also going to be a great combo in Historic, because, of course, as many people know, in Historic, thanks to the Mystical Archive, we're going to get the Storm cards. So being able to essentially bounce this infinite times and then Grape Shot on your opponent for lethal, or maybe if you have black in your mana pool, being able to do Tendrils of Agony is absolutely absurd. So yeah, you're going to see this annoying little elemental a lot, and that's why it's the number 7th on my list. Number 6. Oh, this card's absurd. Estus Auric Overload is a very, very powerful card. The main reason why it's so powerful is just the factor that a 4-mana 2/4 double strike, that's perfectly great stats on its own, but the Magecraft ability is what kills this card. Just the factor that, well, what I mean killing in the sense that it makes the card amazing. Because the factor is, as stated before, one of the popular mechanics that we have still in the format is Eldraine Adventure Spells. And having this as a way to return any adventure creature spells that died or got milled and such, being able to return those spells with Magecraft from your graveyard to your hand, since all of them are non-legendary. So being able to return a Bonecrusher Giant from your graveyard to your hand and be able to stomp and get the Bonecrusher Giant out, amazing. Being able to do stuff like maybe even Brazen Borrow or Lovestruck Beast, like I could go on with all the adventure spells in the format, and even the stuff that sees little play. Just being able to use that to return this to your hand, just very, very powerful. Also, this is going to be very powerful in aristocratic / also just like essentially mid-range aggro decks to a extent, because we do got the next portion of this, since this is 2 cards. Awaken the Blood Avatar. Awaken the Blood Avatar is absurd. Just being able to, in theory, get this down to 2 mana to get a Edict effect on your opponent, and also getting a 3/6 black and red avatar creature token that essentially anytime it attacks, it makes drains your opponent for free. Well, not drains, it deals free damage to your opponent. Which, by the way, if you for some random reason play this in Torbrand, yes, since it's technically a black and red avatar, it's going to deal 6 damage to your opponent, so yeah, that's really, really absurd. Also, one thing I want to point out. Remember, this is a gold creature. So, sorry, that's a little sneak peek. So this is a gold creature, so guess which removal spell doesn't get targeted by this? Vanishing Verse. Also, the token doesn't get targeted by Vanishing Verse. You kind of get my point of what I'm trying to say, why Vanishing Verse was on the honorary mentions now? Nevertheless, this is a very powerful card in aristocratic-based strategies and reanimator-based strategies, as well as just a way to just essentially regenerate value of your adventure-based creatures. This, as well as Awaken the Blood Avatar, I feel like it's going to see a lot of play. Plus, the time you're able to claim the Firstborn and then steal some of your opponent to sacrifice to play to Awaken the Blood Avatar, it's going to just feel amazing. Next up on the list. This one, I'm really only going to talk about the front side, though I will admit the back side is a pretty good component of this card, but really I'm just going to talk about the front part. Valentine, Dean of the Vein. 1 mana for a 1/1 Menace lifelink, and it has, if a non-token creature an opponent control would die, you can exile it, and if you have mana to sink into it, you can sink 2 mana to generate a pest token. Honestly, I just think this is just a very powerful 1-drop. A 1 mana Menace lifelink, very powerful, especially against aggro-based shells. Plus, also, just the factor that it makes any of your removal spell into essentially an exile spell cannot be understated. And in a combat, essentially, if your opponent's creature dies, it exiles it. Especially with how many popular reanimator based strategies we have in the format, with like cycling, as well as stuff like essentially like any reanimator Loris package, just being able to essentially negate that package with Valentine on the battlefield, so your opponent has to prioritize killing this, which then can help you play your later game graveyard hate. Something to keep in mind. Plus, also, this might be a card better later down the line, because it is a vampire, which, granted, we are going to get into a set where vampires are going to matter a lot, especially with the Innistrad set being a vampire set. So, something to keep in mind is what I'm saying. Nevertheless, that's the reason why Valentine is 5 on the list. Now, number 4, this is the only list that's coming from this uncommon, like, essentially college cycle, though I will say all of them are relatively powerful. But Decisive Denial just tops them all, in my opinion. Decisive Denial, green and blue, instant, choose one, target creature control fights target creature you don't control, and then you can either do that, or you can pretty much target a non-creature spell unless control pays free. This is the card that Simic Stompy decks really, really, really needed. I'm just going to say that right off the bat, because the fact that you have that versatile choices within this card is absurd. So it helps you to pretty much have both a counterspell as well as a fight removal spell all in one card, which then allows you to put more of your cards in your deck design that's more of the stompy variety. Like you can play more of the creatures and have to play less negates, because this can be your negate. At least for pretty much game 1 if needed. The versatility of this in Best of 1 is going to be absurd. Like, there's just a lot of this is just going to bring up mid-range to any Simic, like, Stompy decks up a notch, because Decisive Denial is a card within their decks. Plus, you can also play this in free color decks like Teamer, just being able to counter your opponent's Sultai Ultimatum or Genesis Ultimatum. Being able to counter Planeswalkers, very nice. Like, this is a card that's going to be really good early game. It's going to be good mid-game. It might even be really good late game. While, granted, you might not be able to counter a spell because your opponent might be paying the free, you can still fight a problematic blocker, which then hopefully can allow you to get in for the kill. So, Decisive Denial, very versatile in the Simic Stompy decks. I think this card is going to see a lot of play. It's just very, very powerful. Now, number 3... I'm kind of a little bit cringy in creating this card, mostly because, as stated before, as you've probably seen with the pretty much commentary from the community, there's some potentially problematic stereotypes that are regarding to the overall character design of Killian and his background environment in general. I'll provide a link down below of some really good sources that kind of explain the stereotypes that are in play and why they are kind of problematic. But really questionable character stereotype issues aside, Killian is a absurd Magic the Gathering card. Like, Killian is... it's good. Like, it is a really, really, really good Magic the Gathering card. Like, 2 mana for a lifelink menace, that's great. That is perfectly fine itself. Also, just that static effect of spells you cast that target creatures costing 2 less to cast. That blows the whole window on potential cards you can play in Standard. Like, the fact that it makes all those free costs, like Pacifism-like effects or Faith Fetter-like effects, reducing them by 2 just as long as you target a creature, that's great. Like, making Faith Fetters cost 2 mana, that's good. Being able to have Disenchant cost 1 mana if it targets a artifact creature, that's really good. Being able to cast Sublime Epiphany for 4 mana. 4 mana! As long as you target a creature? That's insane! Like, there's a variety of powerful removal that's already even in the format that, thanks to the stat reduction, will get see play with it. Like, being able to make Stomp cost 1, that's good. Being able to make, like, a Petty Fat cost 1, that's good. Being able to make a Murderous Rider cost 2, great. Being able to make an Extinction Event costs... not Extinction Event, Eat to Extinction, that's what I'm thinking. Costs 2 mana, and any spell that is 4 mana target removal costs be 2 mana target removal? That is ridiculously freaking absurd. Like, there is so many synergies that people are going to brew around this, both in standard, maybe even internal formats, and even commander. Like, a lot of people in the commander sphere have been talking about this card. And I know the argument that people are going to say. But, Lev Dev, this dies the Bone Crusher Giant. Yes, it does. But, here's the thing. You don't play it on turn 2. You can just play this on turn 3, hold up a protection spell, which, by the way, the protection spells now get discounted thanks to Killian. Keep that in mind. Or even if you want to play this on turn 2, all you have to do is just play a turn 1 Selfless Savior. There you go. I mean, I'm serious. This card is absurd. Like, if you can keep this on the board, this card is going to do some stupid shenanigans. Not to mention, this can be bring back with Luris, or called the Dark Dwellers, and just... This card is an insane Magic card. Like, as much as I cringe at the problematic story elements that a lot of people have been pointing out with its character design, the card design in itself is absolutely nutty. It's going to see some play. Next up on the 2 list, it's pretty much one of the commands, and while I would usually like to cheat and put all the commands on this 2 spot, since I do feel like all the commands will have their fringe play in popular standard decks, I think if there's one that has to make it the list, it's probably Prismari Command. Prismari Command is just a very, very powerful command. Just having all those effects in Izzet is very, very powerful. Being able to destroy problematic artifacts like Mazemind Tome, as well as Embercleave and Great Hinge for free mana, that's insane. Being able to create a treasure token that give you a mana rebate if you only just need to do a 2 mana shock or 2 mana draw, that's insane. Being able to deal 2 damage and then do draw if you need to, like discard cards to help fuel a reanimator-based strategy, that's absurd. Like, there's a lot of powerful effects. Oh, by the way, for some random reason, if you go 4 colors, like with the Silver Quill command or something in Prismari command, Killian make those reduced by 2 mana. Oh, and it's also a gold card that doesn't get targeted by Vanishing Verse. Okay, I'm gonna get off that, but still, Prismari Command, very versatile card. We'll see play in Standard. It also has a chance to see play in Eternal formats like Historic as well as Modern. It's a very powerful, versatile card. Keep your eye on it. The mana cost is great for it with all the effects you get from it. So, what is my number 1 card of MTG Strixhaven? School of Mages. My number 1 card is, speaking of Prismari, Gallicev Prismari. This card, where do I start with this card? Okay, first of all, technically thanks to the fact that you generate a treasure with this, you actually get a free mana Legendary Creature Elder Dragon free for it with all these effects. And these effects kind of remind me of a semi-balanced Urza, which if the fact that I'm referencing Urza with this card should probably give you an indication of how absurd this card can be. Plus, also, there's already popular artifacts in the format, stuff like Mazemind Tome and such, and we also have ways to generate treasure with stuff like Magdi, as well as other treasure generation spells that are in the format, as well as coming into the format, thanks to Strixhaven, so you can easily try to play this on turn 3, and as long as you have 2 artifacts out on the battlefield, including the one you generate from Gallicev, you can easily protect this with just like a negate, or a miscast, or maybe you're playing this in Teamer, and then you can just do a decisive denial. Like, there's a bunch of silly shenanigans you can do with Gallicev Prismari. Plus, if you play this on curve, or maybe play this on turn 5, generating the treasure will help you ramp into bigger spells that then you don't even have to sacrifice the treasure as long as it's instant sorcery, like let's say you play a Genesis Ultimatum, or maybe a powerful instant sorcery spell of any type, maybe even the Magma Opus that's coming from the set. Like, that's a lot of silly shenanigans you can do with this card. And the factor is that it generates the treasure as well as just makes all your artifacts being able to help you cast instant sorcery spells is absurd. Like, imagine being able to tap an Embercleave that's already equipped to somebody to be able to cast a negate. That is absolutely hilarious. This is going to see play in multiple archetypes. It's going to probably see play probably at first in the kind of like Dwarfs Dragon deck that people have been trying to make work. It's probably going to be attempt to play it in that. But it's going to be an auto-include in any Izzet Tempo list. It's going to be an automatic include in any, like, mid-range to rampart lists, like, especially those that are heavily on the instant sorcery plan. Like, this card is very powerful. This is probably going to be the safest mythic craft, though, as I stated in my warning before, be careful crafting. But it's a very powerful card. Going to probably see play in standard without a sweat. I definitely will. This is definitely going to see a lot of commander play, and I can even see this having a chance in historic and such. It's just that good. And that is my top 10 cards, as well as the honorary mentions of Strixhaven School of Mages. If you disagree or you have any other cards that you think should be on the list, please tell me in the comments down below. After this, I am going to have my sleepers list as pretty much my cards keep an eye on list after this, so keep an eye on that list later down the line. Hopefully, I get to participate in the early access event later this week. We're still kind of waiting for confirmation of that, but I do think that's still happening. I'll provide more detail once I can. Nevertheless, I hope you all have a lovely day. This is LevDev signing out. Bada beep, bada boop.